Okay, so the fourth and final speaker in this track will, again, we are broadening our perspectives a bit and going to our neighbor country of Norway, as we have the great pleasure of inviting and welcoming Associate Professor Lisbeth Brevik, who's also from the pedagogical sciences. So thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be invited to this conference. I'm an associate professor at the University of Oslo in Norway, and I work with teacher education and English didactics specifically, which in this context means English as a second language. I'm going to talk about the potential of digital tools for enabling the observation of comprehension in the secondary classroom. And this is based on a paper I wrote with Dr. Chris Davis from the University of Oxford. And what we did was to look at what goes on in classrooms. So I primarily do classroom research, both with and without video data. And what we realized was that a lot of things are going on in classrooms using digital tools, which may amount to what we could call daily use, and not necessarily always innovations or new uses of technology. So I've chosen to use this picture saying that I'm going to talk about how we emphasize digital competence because students use this competence a lot, and not only, as I said, in new ways. In Norway, we have computers for each student, particularly in secondary school. So at some schools, they are given a computer when they start. At other schools, they are invited to bring their own. This does not mean that a Norwegian classroom looks like this. It actually does not. We very seldom use these computer rooms anymore. More commonly, the laptops are brought into the classrooms. So, we've also today, so far, been talking a lot about these two zones, and this is probably a very known picture stolen from the internet. And I think that I've heard lots of interesting aspects on this, where the magic happens, where new things happen. So I thought I'd talk about the comfort zone instead. At some point, I think it's really important that we do not, as has also been said today, that we do not think of technology only in these new ways, but also look at how it is used. And that's the positive thing of being a classroom researcher, that I can actually see what goes on in naturalistic environments. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 classrooms, which means 4 different practices. In Norway, as in other countries, we have in upper secondary school, students can choose to go to general academic tracks, which leads to higher education, or they can go to vocational tracks intended for work experience immediately after upper secondary school. So these 4 classrooms are from 2 academic tracks and 2 vocational tracks. I'm going to show you how a Wordcloud, a digital Wordcloud, was used in one of the classrooms. Then a simple search, as you mentioned as well. How do they go about when they're asked to do digital searches in the classroom? Then about simply writing, using their laptops, using programs, Word for example, to write, and how they bring that into school. And finally, this is a technical drawing of a tractor shovel, which was intended to be used in the workshop the following day, and that also links to about purposes that was mentioned earlier. It has to be something that the students feel they need to use. And interestingly enough, this was the one classroom I observed where I thought the teacher was not going to use technology at all, because he was wheeling in the old-fashioned machine where you put plastic on it. And he directed it to the side wall. And I thought, okay, so you're that kind of teacher. Because in this room there was it was really well equipped with technology. But he needed that in addition to all the other equipment, and I'm going to tell you why. So, the practices I'm going to focus on is not necessarily only what the students used, but what it enabled the teacher to observe. Because I think if we're going to talk about technology, it cannot be, as again has been mentioned, the artifacts. It has to be what it does to our thinking, to our learning, and to our development. So, in the first case, this was a general academic classroom. And this is a word cloud. And I guess all of you have seen one. I don't know if all of you have made one. But there is an algorithm. If you take a text, paste it into this box in the program, click create, and it will create a word cloud based on the number of times any given word appears in the text. So the more frequent a word is, the bigger it becomes in a word cloud. What happened here was basically that the teacher made a word cloud. He was planning to teach the students or to ask the students to read a short story about an American author. And he didn't want to tell which author. So this is not the word cloud he used, but he went to a Wikipedia text about this author. What he did was to transform that text into a word cloud, deleting the author's name. And then he gave the word cloud to the class and asked them to talk. Who do you think this is? For one, it's an authentic task because they knew, and the teacher knew, that they weren't expected to know already. It was not based on prior knowledge in terms of this specific author, although they could draw on prior knowledge in interpreting this word cloud. And since they knew about the algorithm, they also understood that the larger words probably meant more or described the author more. So, the author the teacher wanted to focus on was Ernest Hemingway. And the interesting thing is, because the teacher chose this simple and very popular classroom device of the online word cloud software, he transformed the somewhat uninviting nature of a Wikipedia text into something that was immediately vivid and accessible to the whole class, effectively engaging them in a process of collective comprehension, because that was what went on. They talked to each other. They were genuinely trying to solve a problem together. And as a pedagogical tool, this appeared to be effective. And to some extent, it also proved effective in providing a shared point of reference. And the interesting thing is that the students were able to articulate their developing comprehension of the topic, and the teacher was there during the process. What happened, interestingly, I think, was they were sitting in groups. So in one of the groups, I was close to that group, and one of the boys, or I could hear that they talked about Ernest Hemingway. I could hear that they talked about Knut Hamsun, the Norwegian author. I didn't hear what they said. The teacher didn't think that any of the students recognized who the author was, although they gave hints, they had good they guessed, they predicted, they built on the words in the word cloud. But when I interviewed the students afterwards, one of the boys said that he had immediately almost recognized that it had to be Ernest Hemingway, because there were words in the word cloud that reminded him of Hamsun, and he had read a novel or a short story, I can't quite remember, by Hamsun, and at that time read Hamsun. Then immediately afterwards he had read a short story by Ernest Hemingway, and he said, I thought they were quite similar. I thought that they had several things in common. So when he saw this word cloud, he thought about Hamsun, but the teacher had said he was an American author. Then he linked. This is a highly sophisticated connection, and this is something that went on, and it has to do with comprehension. So again, the digital tool use, the teacher made it, but it enabled him to observe comprehension and discussion, and ultimately connections. The second case was what I've called internet explorations. This was in a vocational class. And vocational students are in general thought to not be very interested in theory. So the teacher was struggling a bit with how to get them interested in the topic of the USA. They were going to read about environmental policy documents, or at least environmental policy. So he thought, what if he asked them to go online and search for something they were interested in about the USA, to start out there and then move towards this specific topic. And that's what he did. And what we saw was basically what you've seen dozens of times: students going online, looking at what they're interested in. Several of them were interested in American cars. What the teachers saw was that because they were given the opportunity to search, to use their competence in searching, but still linking this to the topic of the USA, and he asked them also to find a topic they wanted to present orally in class. And they knew that this was something that was linked to an overall topic. So the teacher skillfully utilized a digital tool by having his students carry out active digital searches for information that they were later going to present orally. Again, the role of digital tool might be seen as quite minor, given that the information collected was subsequently shared orally, but interviews, as I said earlier as well, indicated that some, at least, felt their opportunity to carry out these searches was liberating and stimulating. And as far as the teacher was concerned, it generally encouraged and demonstrated the use of active comprehension strategies, which again led to comprehension. In case 3, the teacher asked the students to summarize the text at home. That means that they transformed the text they had read into a written summary, and they wrote it on their computers at home. However, in class, they used the computers as a screen for reading and for sharing. So what they did was that the teacher asked them to read their summary out loud. The others had their own summaries on their screens. And what they did was actively adjust their own when they listened. So again, there was a collective way of using the digital tools. Most interestingly, I've chosen these two Nemi cartoons. The top one says, "A great book should leave you with many experiences, and slightly exhausted at the end, you live several lives while reading it." This means that some of the students transformed into their summaries simply what was in the text, a summary of the text, a text base. While others did this, the idea of no two persons ever reading the same book. So they also used the text, but they added their own interpretation of the text. And this was also most liberating in the classroom to listen to the others. And I could see that several of them did some changes to their own when they listened to different summarizations. So again, the students used word processing software in order to write summaries of a demanding text at home, which the teacher was able to draw on subsequently in class by reflecting on the work of individuals in order to review and validate processes of comprehension collectively. The effectiveness of how the use of this digital tool had previously engaged student thinking and comprehension on an individual basis was then augmented collectively from the display of individual and collective summarization strategies. So again, a sharing of learning and thinking. Finally, the collaborative writing aspect, the which I said, where the teacher wheeled in this quite old-fashioned, I thought, plastic tool. But he projected that drawing on that wall because he wanted the students to make this. This is student-made in the lesson I observed. He said, "Your welding teacher has told me that in the workshop tomorrow, you're going to weld this tractor shovel to a tractor." He also says that if you don't know how to do this before you come into the workshop, you won't be able to finish it on time. So then the English teacher said, "I have no idea what this is, but I have the drawing. I've been told that you know how to do this, and I'm going to help you during the process of interpreting and making this instruction." What they did was, they discussed, the teacher said, "What's the first step you need to do?" They said so. He said, "Do you agree?" When they agreed, one student went up to the classroom computer, which was projected on the wall, and wrote the first step. They continued, all of the students taking part in this. at the end of the lesson, the teacher said, print it out, bring it to the workshop tomorrow, then bring it to the next English lesson because we need to revise whether this worked or not. So again, making it personal, the personal relevance came through. And the teacher could observe this process through the use of digital equipment and technology in the classroom. So, observing student reflection through digital co-production of text. The teacher had his students co-produce technical instruction on the classroom computer, which he was then able to project in front of the whole class. And as a result, he was able to observe a process of collective comprehension taking place, involving a cycle of reflection, discussion, and formulation of understanding. Thus, the use of digital tools enabled active processes of comprehension by individuals and groups in the first place, resulting in the co-construction of understanding within the class as a whole, that the teacher was able to observe in process, and I think that's the key. So, the final comment is that I hope to have shown that these 4 cases each involved different use of digital tools of one kind or another, using internet-based resources and computer software in various ways, but all with certain key aspects of how digital tools are characteristically used in classrooms to support student learning and comprehension. And in each case, it's possible to identify ways in which the tools used, either peripherally or centrally, contributed both to fostering processes of comprehension and to making these processes visible to the teacher and to some extent to the students themselves. So to me, these are examples of naturalistic uses in the classroom. What I've chosen to end with, not only emphasizing digital competence, but the daily use of it. And I think this is where we need to go to make it into thinking and learning and development. Thank you.
Thank you.